1823.
From the age of sail to the Cold
A young
War,
America,
control
barely
of the
20
Atlantic
years
has
old,
always
told all of
dictated the
Europe's
balance of power.
empires. Do not even think about it, but why? What gave this fledgling nation the audacity to draw a line in the sand against the most
A
powerful
new era of
monarchies
global
on Earth?
competition began,
You
marked
have
by
to
rapid
understand the
industrial
world they were
expansion
living in.
and the modernization of military
It was a
forces.
world of chaos.
The Great
Napoleon
War
had just
reshaped the
shattered the
continent,
old order,
setting
and
the
now
stage for
the
a new,
Spanish Empire
colder
was
conflict.
crumbling.
If we
From
move
Mexico
the fleet through
to
the straits
Argentina,
here, we cut off their
colonies
northern
were
supply
erupting
routes.
in revolution,
That risk is too
casting
high.
off
It could
centuries
provoke
of
a direct
European
confrontation.
rule.
As the focus
For
shifted
the
across the
United
Atlantic,
States,
the emerging
this was a
superpowers
moment of
began to
both
redraw the map of
opportunity and
influence in the
profound
Americas,
anxiety.
setting the stage for
They
decades of
saw
proxy.
new,
The strategic
independent
imperatives of
republics,
the Cold War
mirrors
era
of their own
often
struggle.
masked a surprising
But
hollowness
they
at
also
the heart
saw
of
a power
conventional
vacuum.
forces.
And nature,
The Caribbean
as you
became
know,
the focal point
abhors
of the
a
Cold
vacuum.
War. As
The
tensions
kings of
escalated,
Europe,
the world
terrified
held
of
its breath.
revolutionary
From these
ideas
bustling
spreading,
docks
were
flowed the
forming
wealth of the
alliances.
empire, a testament to an
They were
unmatched
looking at these
industrial
newly
and
freed
naval
lands
capacity
not
that
as
defined
sovereign
an era.
nations, but as ripe for the picking. A new wave of colonization, right on America's doorstep. The
By
question
early
was not
19th
if
century,
Europe would try to
Britannia
reclaim
truly
its
ruled
lost
the
dominion,
waves,
but when?
securing trade routes and expanding
And what could
the
a
empire's
small,
reach.
agrarian republic possibly do to stop them? The Monroe Doctrine's real secret
burgeoning
is that
United
America's
States began a
grand
complex,
statement relied
often
on a
fraught
naval
relationship
force
with the
that was
dominant
not its
British
own.
Empire, a bond
Picture
symbolized
the
by the
year
maritime connection.
1823.
Yet, these alliances proved
The
temporary.
great empires of
the
Europe,
continent was
licking
rapidly
their wounds
descending
after
into a
the
new era of
Napoleonic
maritime
Wars,
struggle and
are eyeing the
uncertainty.
newly independent republics of Latin America, hungry to reclaim what they see as lost territory. From Washington,
From the
President
nascent
James
United
Monroe
States,
issues a
the
stunning
Monroe Doctrine
declaration.
signaled a new era of
He
influence
tells the old
stretching
world that the
southwards
Western
across the
Hemisphere,
continent. The
any
empires of the
attempt
old
to
world
impose
cast their
their
shadow
system
far
on any
across the
nation
new.
in the
By
Americas would be
1820,
viewed
the
as a
struggle for
direct
influence
threat
in
to
South
the
America
peace
was
and
reaching its
safety of the
zenith.
United States. It was an incredibly bold statement for a young nation to make. But the United States had no meaningful way
By the
to enforce it.
mid-1800s, the old forms of
navy
defense
was
were
minuscule,
brutally
its
reforged
army
into
provincial.
tools of conquest.
The
As
declaration
the old
seemed like a
powers vied for
spectacular
control,
bluff.
the true cost of
So
their
why did it
geopolitical
work?
games was measured in
Because
dust
another
and
power,
decay.
the true master of the seas, had the same goal. Great Britain, with its globe-spanning Royal Navy, wanted open markets for its goods, not a return to Spanish or French colonial monopolies. The Monroe Doctrine was protected not by American cannons, but by British commercial interests. America provided the words, but Britain provided the shield. It was a partnership of convenience, one that left a critical question hanging in the air for the next century. What happens when those interests diverge? This policy wasn't just
1945 marked
reinterpreted,
not an end,
it
but
was
a profound
weaponized.
shift in global power.
The true
previous
legacy of
administration was
Theodore
gone, and a new
Roosevelt's
authority was
Monroe
rising.
Doctrine.
Throughout history, the
For
symbols
nearly
of power
80
have
years,
often been
the
carved
doctrine
in wood
was a
and
simple,
stone,
defensive
enduring
line
long after
drawn
the
in the
regimes
sand.
they represent have fallen.
A warning to
In the
Europe,
volatile
stay
dawn
out
of
of
the
the
new century,
Americas.
diplomacy often
was a
gave way
shield.
to the imminent threat of
But then
force.
came Roosevelt.
In the early hours of the
He
morning,
looked
the
at that
decree was
shield and
finalized.
saw a club.
It was a decision that would
He saw
reshape the
chronic
geopolitical
wrongdoing
landscape
and
of the entire
instability in
continent.
Latin American nations, and he saw European powers circling like vultures, using unpaid debts as an excuse to land troops.
It was a bold declaration
Think about
of
the
power,
Venezuela crisis
transforming
of
America's role
1902.
from protector to policeman
German
of
and
the
British
Western
warships
Hemisphere.
blockading a South
As the
American
great powers
coast.
modernized their fleets,
To
the
Roosevelt,
stage was
this
set
was
for a new
unacceptable.
century of geopolitical conflict
So,
at sea.
in 1904,
The era of
he
overt
announced
naval
his
confrontation
corollary.
gave way to a colder,
It was
more
a radical
calculated struggle
twist.
for global dominance,
The
fought in the
United
back
States
rooms
would
of
no
power.
longer just prevent European intervention. It would now intervene first. It claimed the right to exercise, in his words, an international police power. The United States would be the debt collector, the regime stabilizer, the ultimate
The
arbiter
military's
of the
grip
Western
on the nation's
Hemisphere.
wealth symbolized a new
Imagine
era
the
of
original
centralized
doctrine
control
as a
and
no
geopolitical
trespassing
realignment.
sign facing
The
Europe.
rise of industrial power was
Roosevelt
intrinsically
ripped it
linked to
down and
maritime
replaced
dominance.
it with one that said,
These
under
bustling
new
ports
management,
were the arteries
with the
of empire.
United States as the sole
Geopolitical shifts
proprietor.
in the Caribbean placed
The
immense
shield
pressure
had
on the
become a
Haitian
license
leadership.
for
The
intervention.
stability of the entire region
And for the
hung in
nations
the balance.
of Latin America,
By the dawn of the
the
20th
era of the
century,
big
global
stick
power was no
just
longer
beginning.
measured in land area, but in columns of figures and industrial output.
Economic
The summer of
strangulation,
1914
military might.
shattered the fragile peace.
This is
Europe's
the brutal
armies
legacy
mobilized,
of
and the
American
world was
benevolence.
plunged into a conflict that would, as
The
the old
Roosevelt
empires
corollary
mobilized
was
their
never
armies,
just words
the
on
true
paper.
measure of their power
It
lay
was a
not in
loaded
manpower,
gun,
but
pointed
in
squarely
bullion.
at the heart of Latin America. And for the next 30 years, the United States would pull the trigger. You see,
From the halls of
promise was
finance to the
stability.
streets of rising empires,
The reality
the 19th
was
century
subjugation.
ushered in an unprecedented
In
struggle
Cuba,
for global
the
dominance.
Platt Amendment became
The
a
warring
blank check for
cobblestones hold the
intervention,
memory of a
leading
turbulent
to
past,
multiple occupations.
a history of power constantly
In
shifting hands
Nicaragua,
across the
United
continent.
States Marines
As the old
landed in
empires waned,
1912
new
and didn't
powers
fully
emerged,
leave for 2
redrawing
decades.
the map of the world. A
They
history
weren't
captured
just
in
soldiers,
these very pages.
they were collectors,
The legacy
seizing
of these
control
generals
of customs
defined an
houses
era.
to then imagine
Their
your nation's
strategies
sovereignty
etched into
being
the maps
auctioned
of a
off to the
transforming
highest bidder.
continent. While the great
That was the
powers
game.
redrew the maps in Europe,
In
the
Haiti,
true cost
a
of their
19-year
ambitions was paid in the
occupation saw
remote,
the United States
resource-rich jungles
rewrite
of
the
the world.
Constitution to
Nation.
allow foreign
The great
land
powers
ownership and
mobilized.
place the national
What
treasury
began as a
directly under
localized
its
dispute
control.
soon escalated into a
This
global
was a blueprint
conflict
for
where
empire,
Europe was
executed
mobilizing
with
for the
brutal
second time in a
efficiency.
generation. A
They called it
geopolitical
dollar
shift that
diplomacy,
promised
a neat
unprecedented
little
destruction.
phrase for what it really
The shadow
was,
of the mobilization
economic
quickly
warfare
fell
backed
over the
by
civilian
bayonets.
populations, a stark
Every
reminder
intervention
of the shifting power
solidified
dynamics
American
gripping the region.
control, extracting
Erected
wealth
during the
and
Cold
crushing
War,
dissent.
this structure symbolized
And with
the
every
unwavering
occupation,
authority
a
of the
deep,
new
simmering
geopolitical
resentment
order.
took root, a legacy of anger
The signing
that would
of the
eventually
treaty
boil
marked a
over in
pivotal
ways
moment in
Washington
the
could never
geopolitical
have
landscape of the early 19th century. Control of the seas
predicted.
meant
Nuclear
control
war
of the
narrowly
world,
averted,
a lesson brutally
But the true
enforced
trigger-
throughout the 19th century.
a forgotten decree
Beyond the
from
coastal holdings, the
1823.
interior was a desolate expanse.
Imagine
a
you find
barrier
a
to ambition and a harsh
130-year-old
reality
policy
that defined the
dusted
geopolitical
off
landscape.
and
The
pointed
lines
like a
traced
weapon
on
at
this
a new
map
enemy.
represent more than just territory.
That is
They
exactly what
signify a
happened.
dramatic shift in global
The
power that
Monroe
would resonate
Doctrine,
for centuries.
designed to keep
The Yalta
European
Conference
kings
had
out of
set
the
the
Americas,
stage.
was
Now,
repurposed for
the
the
division
Cold
of
War.
Europe was becoming a stark,
The threat was
terrifying
no longer
reality.
galleons and redcoats. It was an idea. Communism. The Soviet Union was not trying to plant
A
a flag in
continent
Brazil.
defined by its
It
struggle,
was trying to plant
yet
an
united
ideology.
in its determination to
And for
forge an
Washington,
independent
that
path.
was an even greater
What
danger.
began as a cartographic expedition
So,
soon
the
uncovered one of the
doctrine
most significant
evolved.
finds of the era. A
It became
testament to
the
a forgotten
legal and
empire
moral
swallowed by the
justification
Amazon.
for a shadow war. Protecting the Western Hemisphere now meant fighting Soviet influence by any means necessary.
Tensions. The
This
weathered
was not
stones
about
tell
diplomacy.
a story not of glory, but of
It was
collapse.
about covert operations,
By the 19th
Central
century,
Intelligence
these ruins,
Agency-backed
from the
coups,
shifting maps
and
of the
training
19th century,
anti-communist
emerged the
paramilitaries from
geopolitical
Guatemala to
tensions that would
Chile.
define the Cold War
It all
era.
culminated just 90
From the
miles off
remnants
the
of
coast of
conflict,
Florida,
the seeds of
when
a new
Soviet
world
missiles
began to
in Cuba
emerge,
brought the world to the
fundamentally
very
shifting
edge
the
of
balance of
annihilation.
power.
The
Geopolitical
crisis
shifts
passed,
fundamentally
but the
altered the
repurposed
balance
doctrine
of power,
endured, a
leading
blank check for
inevitably to the
intervention
Cold
that
War
would be
era.
cashed again and again.
The
You have to
reorganization
ask,
of the Eastern
who is
Bloc
really
forces
being protected
marked
from
a pivotal
whom?
moment in the escalating Cold War tensions.
In the shadow
The
of the
United
Cold
States
War, the
apologized.
strategies devised here
But
would shape
Latin
the
America
fate of nations
remembers.
for decades to come.
What did the good neighbor
From the great
actually
game of the
undo?
Victorian era to the
Imagine
brinkmanship
a
of the
century
Cold
of your
War,
powerful
the struggle
neighbor
for
breaking
dominance
down your
defined
door
these
whenever they
generations.
felt like it.
As the Cold
Sending
War
soldiers,
intensified, these displays of
installing
military
puppet
might
leaders,
underscored the fragile balance of
seizing
power
your
in Europe.
assets.
By the dawn of the 20th
That
century,
was the reality
naval
for
power
much
and
of
commercial
Latin
shipping
America
became the
under
true measures
Theodore
of global
Roosevelt's
influence,
big stick
redefining the
diplomacy.
geopolitical map.
The resentment
The
was
era
a
of
poison,
industrial might
seeping into
transitioned
every
rapidly into the
interaction.
Cold War. A new
Then,
geopolitical
in
struggle waged in the
1933,
shadows.
a new
The
voice
strategic
from
tension
Washington.
of the Cold War era was a constant
Franklin
shadow.
D.
A
Roosevelt
geopolitical
declares
struggle
the United
where
States
every
will be
move
a
was
good
calculated.
neighbor. The policy is simple: no more armed intervention. The days of the Marines landing on your shores are supposedly
While
over.
empires clashed over borders
It was
drawn
a
on
stunning
paper,
reversal.
the true history of the
A
continent
public
remained
admission
hidden,
of guilt,
swallowed by
wrapped
the
in a
Amazon.
promise of respect. But for the nations south of the border, this was not a moment for simple gratitude. It
As
was
the
a
19th
test.
century began, the
They had
fledgling
spent
republic grappled
generations
with its
pushing
identity,
back against
expanding
American
westward while
dominance.
solidifying power in the new
Now,
capital.
they began to push harder. Mexico nationalized its oil industry, a direct challenge to American corporations.
The turn of the 19th century
Cuba
ignited a
abrogated
geopolitical
the Platt
storm.
Amendment,
Empires
the very
clashed,
law that
their
gave the
conflicts
United
reshaping
States the
borders
right to
across the
intervene.
globe.
They were calling the bluff. They were asking a question that would echo for decades. Is the bully truly gone, or has he just found a quieter, more insidious way to control the neighborhood?
As the old empires waned,
Is
a
the
new power
Monroe
began to
Doctrine a
rise.
relic
The
or the
geopolitical
blueprint
landscape,
for the
once
next global
static, was now a
conflict?
canvas for ambition and
We
expansion.
dive deep.
With the dawn of the 20th
In
century came a
2013,
new era of
the
naval
United
warfare.
States Secretary
The
of State
battleship
stood before the
redefined
world and
geopolitical
declared it was
power.
over. The era of the Monroe Doctrine, he said, was finished. For a moment, it seemed 2 centuries of American dominance in the Western Hemisphere had been formally laid to rest. A new era of partnership,
If
of
we
equals,
withdraw now,
was promised.
they will control all of Southeast
But you
Asia.
have to ask,
And
was
what
it
is
a
the
funeral
cost of that
or
control
just a
in
clever
American
deception?
lives? If we apply pressure
Because just
here,
a few
right
years
at the
later,
center,
the language returned with a
That will
vengeance.
stabilize the entire region
National
within the
security
decade.
officials proudly
This.
proclaimed
the
the
post-war
doctrine was
settlement quickly
alive and
dissolved
well.
into a
The
new
reason-
ideological conflict.
Look at the
The
map.
shadow of the Iron Curtain fell
Look
across
south.
the continent.
The
From the age
21st
of
century
sail to the
challenge
Cold
is
War,
far more subtle
Control
than
of the
European
Atlantic
navies.
has always dictated the balance
It is the
of power.
quiet creep of Chinese infrastructure projects, billion-dollar loans that become economic chokeholds. It is Russian disinformation
A new era of
campaigns and
global
political
competition
alliances
began,
in places
marked by
like
rapid industrial
Venezuela and
expansion
Nicaragua.
and the modernization of military
This is
forces.
not a fight for territory with forts and
The
flags.
Great War reshaped the continent.
It is a battle for
setting the
influence,
stage for a new,
for resources,
colder conflict.
for the very political
If we move
alignment
the
of an
fleet through the
entire
straits
continent.
here, we cut off their northern
The
supply
United
routes.
States
That
now
risk is too
faces
high.
rivals who do
It
not
could provoke
play
a
by
direct
the old
confrontation.
rules,
As the
operating
focus
in
shifted
its own
across the
historic
Atlantic,
backyard.
the emerging superpowers began to
The
redraw the
doctrine
map
is no
of
longer
influence in
just
the
a
Americas,
warning.
setting
It has
the stage
become
for
the
decades
invisible
of
front
proxy.
line in a
The
new
strategic
global power
imperatives of the
struggle.
Cold War era
And the
often
question
masked
is
a
no
surprising
longer if it will be
hollowness at the
tested,
heart of
but
conventional
how.
forces.
The Caribbean became the focal point of the
Forget
Cold War.
what you think you know.
As tensions escalated,
The Monroe
the world
Doctrine
held
wasn't
its
just
breath.
foreign
From
policy.
these bustling
It was
docks
a
flowed the
blueprint for
wealth of the
dominance.
empire, a testament to
For
an unmatched
200 years,
industrial and
this
naval
single
capacity
idea
that
has
defined
shaped
an
the
era.
Western Hemisphere, evolving from a defensive shield into an imperial sword. Imagine its birth in 1823.
By the
a
early
young,
19th century,
fragile United
Britannia
States,
truly ruled
warning
the
the
waves,
colossal
securing
empires of
trade
Europe
routes
to
and
keep their
expanding
hands
the
off the
empire's
newly
reach.
independent republics of the Americas. It was a bold declaration, a line drawn in the sand by a nation that secretly
The
relied
burgeoning
on the
United
British
States
Navy
began
to
a
enforce
complex,
it.
often fraught relationship
But what
with the dominant
happens when a
British
protector
Empire,
grows
a bond
into a
symbolized
predator?
by the maritime connection.
By the turn
Yet
of the
these
20th
alliances
century,
proved
the
temporary.
doctrine had been
The
twisted.
continent was rapidly descending
The
into a new
Roosevelt
era of
corollary
maritime struggle
transformed it
and
from a warning to
uncertainty.
Europe into a justification for the United States to intervene anywhere it saw fit. The shield for Latin America became
From
a
the
cage.
nascent United States,
This
the Monroe
wasn't about
Doctrine
protection
signaled a new
anymore.
era of
It was about
influence,
control,
stretching southwards
enforced
across
through
the
military
continent.
occupations,
The empires of the old
economic
world cast
coercion,
their shadow
and
far
political
across the new.
manipulation from
By
the Caribbean
1820,
to the
the struggle for
Andes.
influence in South America
The
was
original
reaching its zenith.
promise of a hemisphere of independent republics was replaced by the reality of a hemisphere under one nation's thumb. This two-century journey
By the
reveals a
mid-1800s,
profound,
the old
uncomfortable
forms of
truth
defense
about
were
power,
brutally
how a
reforged
principle
into
born
tools
of
of
liberation
conquest.
can become the very
As
tool
the
of
old powers
domination.
vied for control, the true cost of their geopolitical games